What would you do if the man your family called worthless turned out to be the heir to an empire and he just made you his bride? The sun was setting over the city in a soft orange haze when Amelia Carter and her younger sister Sloane walked home from the market. Their arms were full of fresh produce, and the sound of laughter, traffic, and distant music filled the warm evening air. Street vendors called out their last sales of the day. Children chased one another between the stalls, but just as they turned a corner near the old post office, Amelia stopped. "Why are you stopping?" Sloane asked, annoyed. Amelia didn't answer right away. Her eyes had caught something, or rather, someone. Sitting near the wall of a quiet alley, half in shadow, was a young man. His clothes were worn and dirty. His hair looked like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. But it wasn't his condition that made her pause. It was his face. He wasn't begging. He wasn't calling out or waving a cup like the others. He just sat there, back straight, staring at the ground. Silent. Still, as if his body was present, but his soul had gone somewhere far away. "There's something different about him," Amelia whispered. Sloane rolled her eyes and scoffed. "He's a beggar, Amelia. They're all the same." Amelia shook her head slowly. "No, he looks lost." Sloane raised her brows and crossed her arms. "So what are you going to do? Invite him to dinner?" "Honestly, you're hopeless." But Amelia had already opened her purse. "Of course," Sloane muttered under her breath. Amelia walked over carefully, crouched just enough to meet the young man's eye line, and placed a few folded bills on the ground beside him. The man looked up slowly, startled. His eyes met hers, deep brown, tired but alert. His expression shifted from confusion to something Amelia couldn't quite name. Maybe disbelief? "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice almost hesitant. Amelia smiled, gentle and warm. "Please, use it to get something to eat." The man nodded once, holding her gaze a moment longer before looking down again. Back on the sidewalk, Sloane huffed. "You really think you changed his life with $10? Amelia said nothing. She just kept walking. But in her heart, she felt lighter. Not because she expected gratitude or recognition, but because something about that man had stirred something in her. A feeling she couldn't ignore. By the time they reached the gate of their House a Grand, white-pillared home in an upscale neighborhood, Sloane had already pulled out her phone, chattering away about weekend plans. Amelia opened the front door and braced herself. She didn't have to wait long. As soon as they stepped inside, Sloane dropped the shopping bag with dramatic flair. "Mama?" "You won't believe what Amelia did today," she called out, like a child tattling on her sibling. From the living room, Eleanor Carter, their perfectly coiffed mother, looked up from her tea with narrowed eyes. "What is it now?" Sloane pointed like she had just caught a thief red-handed. "She gave money to a beggar, just bent down and handed it to him like she was some kind of saint." Eleanor's face stiffened. She turned her full attention to Amelia. "Is that true?" Amelia sighed. "Yes, Mama. He looked like he hadn't eaten all day." "I just wanted to help." "You just wanted to help," Eleanor repeated, her tone full of ice. She set her teacup down slowly. "How many times have I told you not to waste money on strangers? Do you think we're rich enough to throw cash at every person who looks hungry?" "We live in a 10-bedroom house," Amelia said calmly. "I don't think helping one person will bankrupt us. That house exists because I manage this family's name, Amelia. And your father. God rest his soul, left responsibilities, not endless funds. If you're not going to use your head, then at least don't embarrass me in public." From the couch, their older brother Ryan smirked without looking up from his phone. "Maybe Amelia's trying to find her soulmate in the gutter," he said lazily. "Mrs. Beggar Carter has a nice ring to it." Sloane burst out laughing. "Yeah, maybe she'll get invited to live in a cardboard box next." Amelia didn't flinch. She'd heard it all before. Sloane had always been the golden girl, the one who could do no wrong. the future wife of someone rich, preferably from the Westwood family or another elite lineage. Mama Eleanor had been grooming her for that future since they were teens. Amelia. She was the afterthought, the other daughter, the one who was too soft, too kind, too inconvenient. "I'm going to my room," Amelia said quietly. Eleanor waved her off. "Yes, go think about your actions before you end up marrying a street rat." As Amelia climbed the stairs, she could still hear their laughter behind her. She gripped the banister a little tighter. She didn't regret helping that man, not one bit, but deep in her chest, something was stirring. Something she couldn't name. A question that hadn't stopped echoing since she met his eyes. "Who are you, really?" The next morning, the house was filled with the smell of fresh coffee and Eleanor Carter's expensive French perfume. The Carter estate looked peaceful. Sunlight spilled across marble floors, birds chirped in the garden, and the cook was humming softly in the kitchen. But upstairs, Amelia sat quietly on the edge of her bed, pulling on her work shoes. She glanced at the old clock on her nightstands from 45 a.m. She had 15 minutes before her shift started at the local bank. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Her bills, at least. Across the hall, Sloane's laughter echoed from behind a door. Amelia didn't need to guess. Her sister was probably video calling her boyfriend, Travis Reed. A name whispered often in the neighborhood, always followed by raised brows. Everyone knew Travis was trouble. Fast cars, fast money, faster lies. Amelia stood up and grabbed her handbag. As she passed Sloane's room, the door creaked open. Sloane appeared in a silk robe, her long curls perfectly styled, face glowing from her morning routine. "Morning, Amelia," she said sweetly, with a tone that always carried a knife beneath the sugar. "Going to count other people's money again?" Amelia forced a polite smile. "Yes, someone in this house has to." Sloane rolled her eyes. "You should really stop playing the martyr. Not everyone wants to live like a saint." Amelia didn't answer. She just kept walking. Downstairs, the kitchen was bright and buzzing. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her robe pressed, makeup flawless, eyes glued to her tablet. Beside her, Ryan Carter scrolled on his phone with a spoon of cereal dangling lazily from his mouth. Amelia poured herself a small cup of black coffee and stood near the counter, as always. No one ever invited her to sit. It had been that way since she was 13. Eleanor finally glanced up. "You're dressed early." Amelia nodded. "I have the morning shift." Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Sometimes I wonder why you don't just take time off and focus on your future." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "You mean like Sloane?" "She's different," Eleanor replied quickly. "Sloane has options. Potential, connections. You work hard, but you don't network. You don't think strategically." "I think about stability," Amelia said softly. "About building something real." "Real?" Ryan scoffed. "What's real about waking up before sunrise for a job that pays pennies?" Amelia bit her lip, holding back the familiar sting. Sloane entered the kitchen like a runway model entering a press event. "Mama," she said cheerfully, "guess who texted me last night? Jasper Okafor." From the Westwood dinner party, the one with the green Tesla. Eleanor's face lit up like a chandelier. "Jasper? That boy's father is on the board of 3 banks. Oh, Sloane, that's wonderful. What did he say?" Sloane smirked. "He wants to take me to dinner next week, just the 2 of us." Eleanor clapped softly. "That's my girl." Elegant, poised, desirable. She turned to Amelia, expression sharpening. "Do you see the difference, Amelia? Sloane knows how to attract quality. You spend your free time handing money to vagrants." Amelia swallowed hard. That man wasn't dangerous. He didn't even ask for anything. He just looked like a future lawsuit, Ryan cut in. "You really think someone like that has any business near this family?" Sloane giggled. Maybe he'll send her a thank you card made from newspaper scraps. Eleanor smoothed her napkin. Amelia, we're not unkind, but you have to think about perception, reputation. A girl from this family can't be seen nurturing street people, especially not with reporters at every corner these days. The way she said, girl from this family, stung more than Amelia expected. Amelia placed her cup down. I'm late, she said simply. As she walked out the front door, she could still hear them laughing behind her. At the bank, Amelia kept herself busy. She liked the order, the predictability, numbers never judged. Balances didn't gossip, ledgers didn't laugh behind your back. But her mind drifted again to the man near the alley. David. He'd said his name was David. Something about him wouldn't leave her mind. Not pity, not attraction, just gravity. Like her heart had recognized something her eyes didn't understand yet. By lunchtime, she found herself standing near the same alley on her break. But he wasn't there. Gone, she thought, like everyone said he would be. She turned to leave, but paused. Folded neatly on the ledge where he had sat was a note. It was scribbled in rough handwriting, the letters slightly shaky but clearly written. Thank you, Amelia. No one's ever looked at me like I mattered before. David. Amelia stood there for a moment, reading the note over and over again. And for the first time that day, she smiled. The days grew warmer, and spring settled softly over the city. Amelia Carter's schedule stayed the same. Up before sunrise, coffee in a reusable cup, pressed white blouse, and long walks to the bank. She liked the rhythm. It gave her something no one in her family ever gave her, consistency. But that morning, she took a different route home. Something pulled her, not a sound, not a sign, just a quiet nudge inside her heart. She walked a few blocks past her usual turn, her shoes clicking on the pavement in a familiar but slightly unfamiliar part of town. And that's when she saw him. He was walking slowly along the sidewalk, head down, clothes the same worn state as before. His steps were uneven, as if his feet were sore. The way his shoulders slumped screamed exhaustion. But it was him, David. Without thinking, Amelia picked up her pace. Hey! She called out softly. The man turned, startled. Their eyes met again. He blinked in recognition, his face lit up not with a full smile, but with a kind of surprise that softened his otherwise guarded expression. I remember you, he said, voice raspier than last time. I'm Amelia, she replied, offering a small smile. David, he nodded. There was a pause, a beat of silence between strangers who no longer felt like strangers. Where are you headed? She asked gently. He glanced down the street. The other side of town. There's a church that sometimes serves dinner, but it's a long walk and I don't have bus fare. Amelia didn't hesitate. She reached into her bag and pulled out a few folded bills. Here, she said, pressing them into his palm. David looked at the money, then at her. I can't keep taking from you, he said quietly. It's not about taking, Amelia replied. I want to help. He was silent for a moment, then tucked the money away with quiet gratitude. Thank you, he said again, eyes lingering on her face like he was trying to memorize it. Amelia gave a soft laugh. Maybe next time I'll let you buy me a coffee. He smiled. A real one this time, not wide, not flashy, but real. I'd like that. Over the next week, their paths crossed more often, sometimes by accident, sometimes not. Amelia would bring him a granola bar, a bottle of water, or just a warm hello. David, in turn, started to open up. They met one evening at a quiet bench near an old park. The sun was low, casting golden light through the bare branches above them. Amelia handed David a sandwich she'd picked up on her way home. He took it gratefully. So, she said, tell me about yourself. David hesitated. I grew up in an orphanage, he began slowly. Lost my parents when I was little. When I turned 18, I had to leave. No family, No backup plan. Amelia nodded, her chest tightening. I tried to get work, but no diploma. No one wants to hire you if you don't have a resume or a reference, he continued. I did what I could cleaning jobs, hauling crates. But the city eats people like me. Amelia looked at him, really looked at the worn cuffs of his jacket, the calluses on his hands, the fatigue behind his eyes. And yet, there was dignity there, a quiet strength. A man who had suffered, but hadn't crumbled. You don't deserve this, she said softly. David shook his head. Life doesn't always give us what we deserve. She swallowed hard. Still, it's not fair. He turned to her then, really turned. You're the first person in a long time who's looked at me without judgment, he said. I'm not used to that. Amelia met his gaze. I'm not interested in where you've been. I care about where you're going. That made him smile again. Where I'm going, huh? I haven't thought that far ahead in years. Well, she said, maybe you should start. That night, as Amelia walked home under the soft hush of dusk, her heart felt complicated. It wasn't just kindness anymore. It wasn't just sympathy or moral duty. She cared. She truly cared. Not because he needed her, but because he saw her. In a world where she was constantly overlooked by her mother, her siblings, by every socialite and businessman at their family gatherings, David saw her, or he listened when she spoke. He looked at her like she mattered. That thought scared her. But it also kept her warm on the long walk home. Back at the Carter residence, things hadn't changed. Sloane was lounging in the living room in a velvet robe, painting her nails, talking on the phone in a voice 10 decibels too loud. Ryan was playing video games in the den. Eleanor was upstairs, scrolling her iPad, likely looking up spa deals or making mental lists of eligible billionaires for Sloane. Amelia slipped inside quietly, avoiding the usual storm. She knew if they ever found out about David, there would be a war. But for now, their secret was safe. For now, it was just her and the man with no past, no money. But maybe, just maybe, a future. The city air was colder than usual that night. Even the wind seemed meaner, sharper, like it had been sharpened by hardship. Amelia Carter pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she walked home from her shift at the bank. Her feet ached, and her mind was heavy. It had been a long day, paperwork piling up, a rude customer yelling about overdraft fees, and endless reminders from her mother about Sloane's upcoming dinner date with Jasper Okafor. She hadn't seen David in 2 days. No texts, no sightings, no quiet conversations on their park bench. She told herself not to worry. He was probably just moving around, maybe found a short-term job or a church shelter for the weekend. But something inside her refused to calm down. As she passed the alleyway near the corner where they'd first met, a faint sound stopped her in her tracks. A groan, low, strained, and full of pain. She froze. Another groan, then a cough. Without thinking, Amelia turned down the alley, her heels crunching over broken glass and loose gravel. And then she saw him. David. He was on the ground, curled into himself, blood smeared across his shirt, his lips split open. His face was bruised, one eye already swelling shut. He was trying to sit up, but every movement made him wince. "David!" she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes fluttered open. "Amelia?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Oh my God," she breathed. "What happened to you?" "Territory," he mumbled. "They said this was their block, told me to leave. I said I had nowhere else to go." They didn't care. Amelia clenched her fists. She'd heard stories gangs controlling corners, attacking the homeless to keep their zones clean. But hearing it, seeing it on David's face, it made her sick. "We need to get you to a clinic," she said urgently, her hands trembling. "No," he whispered. "I can't. I don't have money." "I didn't ask you to pay," she cut him off, already reaching into her bag. "Lean on me." Come on. He tried to protest, but his strength had left him. With one arm around her shoulders and his weight heavy against her, Amelia helped him up. Every step he took sent waves of pain through his body, but he didn't complain. Not once. The local clinic was quiet when they arrived. A tired nurse looked up from the reception desk, surprised to see a bloodied man being helped in by a woman in a pencil skirt and blazer. "Help, please," Amelia said breathlessly. "He was attacked. He needs treatment." The nurse rose quickly and guided them to an exam bed. Another staff member came in with gloves and supplies. "What happened?" she asked as she began cleaning David's wounds. "Gang attack," Amelia answered, her voice tight. David winced as disinfectant touched his skin, but stayed silent. "He's got a deep cut on his arm," the nurse said, reaching for a needle and thread. "We'll have to stitch it." Amelia didn't move from his side. "I'm staying," she told them. "Just please help him. I'll cover the cost." David turned to her weakly. "Amelia, you don't have to." "I want to," she said firmly. "So stop trying to argue and let them do their job." For the first time since she found him, his lips curled into the faintest smile. "You're stubborn. You have no idea." An hour later, David was cleaned up, bandaged, and lying back against a thin pillow. The fluorescent lights above flickered softly. His face was still swollen, but the bleeding had stopped. The painkillers were working. Amelia sat beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. Her hand rested gently on the edge of the bed. "You should go home," he said quietly. "No. Your family's probably wondering where you are." "They never ask." David turned his head to look at her, eyes glassy from both pain and something deeper. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she met his gaze. "Because I care." David's throat worked around a lump. "I've never met anyone like you, Amelia," he said softly. "Most people pass me by like I'm a stain on the sidewalk, but you saw me, even when I didn't want to be seen." Her heart ached at his words. She took his hand gently, lacing her fingers with his. "You matter, David. You always have. You just forgot for a while." He closed his eyes, trying not to cry. And when he opened them again, he said something that made her heart skip a beat. "You're beautiful." Amelia's breath caught. "Not just your face," he continued, voice steady now, "but the way you see the world, the way you treat people. It's the kind of beautiful that doesn't fade." She blinked fast, trying to push the tears back. "You should rest. I hope I dream about you." She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You just might." It was past 9 p.m. when Amelia finally got David settled in a small spare room at the local clinic. He had fallen asleep, thanks to the painkillers, his breath shallow but even. She sat with him a few more minutes, her hand still resting gently over his. But reality hit hard when she stepped outside. She had missed dinner, again. And in the Carter household, that wasn't just a scheduling mistake, it was a declaration of war. When she walked through the front door, the atmosphere was already charged. Sloane sat on the couch in her silk pajamas, legs curled under her, scrolling her phone with dramatic flair. Ryan slouched nearby, flipping through TV channels like he had somewhere better to be. Their mother, Eleanor Carter, sat at the dining table, a half-finished glass of wine in her hand and eyes like sharpened steel. "Well," Sloane said sweetly without looking up, "look who decided to come home." Amelia closed the door quietly behind her. "I had an emergency." "With who?" Ryan smirked. "Your new homeless boyfriend?" Eleanor's gaze sharpened instantly. "Excuse me." Amelia took a breath. "David was attacked." "I found him in an alley. He was bleeding. I took him to the clinic." The room fell still. "You what?" Eleanor's voice dropped an octave. "I helped someone in need," Amelia said firmly, stepping further into the room. "Because no one else would." Sloane rolled her eyes. "This is getting embarrassing. First, it's pocket change, then it's food." Now she's basically running a shelter. Amelia's jaw tightened. He's a human being, Sloane. He's a liability, Eleanor snapped. You brought a man from the street into our world. Do you understand how dangerous that is? What that says about this family? I don't care what it says to people who only care about image. Eleanor stood up, chair scraping sharply against the hardwood floor. Enough. You've always been the difficult one. But this crosses the line. Amelia folded her arms, trembling but standing tall. Why is it okay for Sloane to date that thug Travis Reed, someone who deals drugs and carries knives, but I'm the villain for helping someone hurt? Eleanor's face turned to stone. Because Sloane has a future. The words cut sharper than anything Amelia had heard before. She's charming, strategic. She knows how to network. And yes, Travis may be a phase, but she'll marry into wealth. She'll make this family proud. And I won't, Amelia whispered. Eleanor didn't answer. You never believed in me, Amelia continued, her voice cracking. Not once. No matter what I did, working 2 jobs, saving money, staying out of trouble, I was never enough. Sloane smirked, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. And you want to know why? Eleanor said suddenly. Amelia froze. You really want to know? Eleanor's voice trembled, not with sadness, but fury. Because you're not mine. The words dropped like a thunderclap in the room. Ryan sat up straight. Sloane's mouth parted in shock. What? Amelia's voice was barely audible. You heard me, Eleanor said coldly. You're not my daughter. The air vanished from Amelia's lungs. You were your father's mistake, Eleanor continued, her tone almost surgical. He had you with another womansome waitress. He never even married. She died in a car crash. He begged me to take you in. And like a fool, I did. Amelia's hands trembled. Her legs felt numb. All these years, she whispered. You raised me just to remind me I wasn't yours. I gave you food. A roof, school, that's more than I owed you. Amelia stared at Herriot, the woman who had shaped her life with silence and side eyes, with cold shoulders and constant comparisons, and felt something inside her break. Sloane spoke up, smug again. So now that you know the truth, maybe you'll finally stop playing victim. Amelia turned to her sister. You're not better than me, Sloane. You've just always had someone clearing your path. Because I'm worth it, Sloane snapped. No, Amelia said quietly. Because you scream the loudest. Eleanor stepped forward. You want to keep seeing that street rat? Fine. But not under this roof. Amelia looked between them, her so-called family, the ones who had never once shown her love without strings. Then she made her choice. Then I'll leave, Ryan scoffed. Where will you even go? To your broken boyfriend's cardboard palace? Amelia ignored him. She walked past them, straight up the stairs, and into her room. In 10 minutes, she had a bag packed. Clothes, her journal, a small framed photo of her real father, hidden all these years in a drawer. When she came back down, Eleanor was waiting at the bottom step, arms folded. You walk out that door, she said. You don't come back. Amelia stared into her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she didn't flinch. Goodbye, she said, and then she walked. Out the door, into the night, into the unknown, but not alone. Because just 2 blocks away, waiting under the flickering street lamp in front of the clinic, was David. Bruised, bandaged, and leaning on a cane, but standing tall. When he saw her with that bag over her shoulder, he didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. He just opened his arms. And for the first time in her life, Amelia Carter ran towards someone not for approval, not for validation, but for love. The rain came unexpectedly that night, soft at first, then heavier. As if the sky itself had been holding back too long and finally gave in. Amelia Carter and David walked side by side down the quiet street, their only shelter a borrowed umbrella and each other. Her overnight bag swung from her shoulder. His limp was slower than usual, but they didn't rush. Neither of them spoke much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said in glances, in the way Amelia had walked out without looking back, in the way David had been waiting for her, like he knew she would come. After a while, David stopped walking. They were standing in front of an unfamiliar corner. A black SUV sat parked beside the curb, sleek, spotless, out of place. Amelia blinked. "Whose car is that?" David turned to her slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes held something deeper. "Mine." She laughed, assuming it was a joke. But then he motioned toward the car. The back door opened and a uniformed driver stepped out, nodded respectfully, and opened the door. Amelia stared. "I don't understand." David looked down for a second, then back at her. "There's something I haven't told you." The words made her stomach twist. "What do you mean?" He took a slow breath, as if every word had been sitting in his chest for years. "My name isn't David," he said. "It's Julian Westwood." The world tilted. Amelia took a half step back. "What?" "I'm the son of Charles and Vivian Westwood," he continued. "Heir to Westwood Enterprises, one of the wealthiest families in the state." Amelia stared at him, blinking through raindrops. "You're lying." Julian David shook his head. "No, I wish I was, but it's true." The driver stepped forward, holding out a coat for him. Julian waved him back. "I left," he said, voice lower now. "I walked away from the boardrooms and the penthouses and the arranged introductions with senators' daughters. I was tired of being a walking inheritance." "Then why?" Amelia's voice cracked. "Why pretend to be homeless? Why lie?" "Because every woman I've ever dated wanted one of three things: my last name, my trust fund, or a shortcut to a social circle they'd kill to be part of." He looked directly into her. "I needed to know if love was still real, or if I'd become just another brand name to collect." Amelia said nothing. Her mind was racing, heart pounding. The man she had sat with on cracked sidewalks, fed sandwiches to, helped into a clinic, was a billionaire in disguise. "I didn't mean to lie," Julian added. "I just didn't want you to see the wealth first." "I wanted you to see me." Amelia's breath caught in her chest. "So this was all a test?" "No," he said instantly. "It started that way. But then I met you." He took a small step forward, slowly. "You didn't just give me money. You gave me dignity. You talked to me like I mattered, not because of who you thought I was, but because of who I actually am." Amelia blinked. "You let me risk everything." "I didn't ask you to." "But you knew," she whispered. "You knew what I was giving up." Julian nodded slowly. "Yes, and I was willing to walk away with you, even if I never told you who I really was." The street was silent except for the sound of rain hitting the hood of the car and the steady hum of her heartbeat in her ears. He held out a hand. "I want to show you where I'm from, if you still want to come." Amelia stared at him. At the man who had slept under bridges, who had quietly watched her life from the shadows, who had taken beatings without complaint, and now stood there like a prince out of a storybook. And yet he was still the same man, the same eyes, the same kindness, the same brokenness that mirrored her own. She placed her hand into his. The drive was silent, but not awkward. Amelia looked out the window as they climbed a hill she didn't recognize. The city lights sparkled below. Finally, the car pulled through ornate black gates and stopped in front of a house that wasn't a house. It was a mansion. It looked like it belonged on the cover of an architecture magazine. Tall white columns, floor-to-ceiling glass, a courtyard with a marble fountain. Everything about it screamed power. The front doors opened, A man and woman stood waiting at the top of the steps, elegant, refined, and unmistakably familiar from business magazines. Julian helped Amelia out of the car. "Mom, Dad, this is Amelia." Vivian Westwood smiled with warmth that surprised her. "We've heard a lot about you, dear." Charles Westwood stepped forward and extended a firm hand. "Welcome to our home." Amelia was too stunned to reply. The foyer alone could fit her entire neighborhood. But they weren't looking at her like she was an outsider. They were looking at her like she belonged. Later, after the house tour, after a dinner she barely remembered tasting, Julian walked her to a private sitting room, lit by low lamps and soft classical music playing from hidden speakers. She stood quietly, trying to find words. "I don't know what to say," she finally admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Julian replied. He stepped closer, voice lower now. "You walked away from everything for me, without knowing who I was." Amelia looked at him. "And what now?" He gave a small smile. "Now I walk through the rest of life with you." He took out a small velvet box, but didn't open it. "Not tonight," he said. "But someday soon, when you're ready. Just know, I'm not here because I need a charity worker. I'm here because I've found the only woman who's ever made me feel human." Amelia's eyes filled, but this time, not from pain, from peace. Because for once in her life, someone didn't want to fix her. They wanted to build a future with her. The Westwood estate looked like something pulled from the pages of a fantasy novel. Tall glass windows that caught the morning light like diamonds. Gardens blooming with roses in every color. Fountains whispered quietly across the stone courtyard. And for the first time in her life, Amelia Carter woke up in a room that felt like peace. She stood at the window, wrapped in a satin robe given to her by Julian's mother, Vivian Westwood. Below, the household staff moved with quiet efficiency. This world, this life was so far from anything Amelia had known, yet something about it felt right. Not because of the chandeliers or marble, but because of him. Julian. He had shown her both the streets and the stars. And somehow, he'd chosen her. Amelia had spent the last few days adjusting to this new reality. She met family friends, watched as Vivian proudly introduced her to board members, and noticed how Charles Westwood always smiled when Julian mentioned her name. But none of that compared to what was coming, because Julian had a plan. That evening, Julian asked her to dress up for dinner, nothing formal, just something she felt beautiful in. Amelia chose a pale blue dress that flowed like water and hugged her softly without screaming for attention. When she stepped out of the guest wing, Julian was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He wore a dark, tailored suit with no tie, his hair freshly trimmed, his shoes polished like mirrors. But what took her breath away wasn't the outfit, it was the look in his eyes. Like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. "You look," he began, then smiled. "Perfect." She blushed. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He extended a hand. "Dinner awaits." But dinner wasn't in the dining hall. Julian led her out of the house, down a stone path that curved through the gardens and opened into a clearing. There, under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights, was a candlelit table set for two. A soft quartet played from speakers hidden among the trees. The night air was cool, fragrant with lavender and jasmine. Amelia turned in awe. "Julian, what is all this?" He simply smiled. "A moment I've been waiting for." They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing. Laughing, remembering, dreaming. And when dessert arrived, a small white cake with always written in chocolate, Julian stood up. The music faded. The lights dimmed just slightly. And Amelia's heart stopped. Because Julian Westwood, heir to a fortune, the man who had once slept on sidewalks just to test the heart of the world, was now getting down on one knee. "Amelia," he said, voice steady but eyes full of emotion. From the first moment you looked at Menot with pity, but with kindness, I knew you were different. And with every day that followed, I realized you weren't just different. You were exactly what I'd been searching for my whole life. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket and opened it. Inside was a stunning diamond ring, delicate and timeless, set in platinum, the center stone surrounded by a halo of sapphires. You saw me when I had nothing, he continued. You stood by me when it cost you everything, and you never once asked for anything in return. Amelia covered her mouth with one hand, eyes welling with tears. I don't want a wedding that makes headlines. I don't care about fancy titles or guest lists, Julian said. All I care about is waking up every day knowing that I get to call you mine. He took a breath. Will you marry me, Amelia Carter? Will you make this crazy life something worth living forever? The world was silent. Even the stars seemed to pause. Amelia didn't speak. She stepped forward, slowly, trembling. Then she nodded and whispered, yes. Julian slid the ring onto her finger, and when he stood, she threw her arms around him, burying her face into his chest, laughing through her tears. The music swelled. The lights danced, and in that moment, under a sky full of stars and fairy lights, Amelia Carterance, the invisible daughter, once mocked for loving a man with nothing, became the fiancée of the most sought-after bachelor in the country. But more importantly, she became someone who had been chosen for love, not bloodline. The next morning, the news broke. Westwood heir engaged to mystery woman. From bank teller to billionaire bride. Who is Amelia Carter? Julian Westwood pops the question in fairytale garden proposal. Photos spread across every gossip site. The dress, the ring, the kiss. But Amelia didn't care. She wasn't interested in headlines. She was thinking about where to place her mother's old photo in their future home. She was wondering if Davidno, Julian liked cinnamon in his coffee. She was still memorizing the way he whispered forever into her ear before she fell asleep. Let the world watch. She was living a fairy tale one that started on a sidewalk, not in a ballroom. And this time, she knew the ending would be hers to write. The Carter residence, once a place of shallow glamour and louder-than-life egos, had grown eerily quiet. Eleanor sat stiffly at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a teacup she hadn't sipped from in 20 minutes. Her eyes were locked on the TV in front of her, where a news anchor spoke with practiced excitement. And in breaking news, America's most eligible bachelor, Julian Westwood, is now officially engaged. But what's really making headlines isn't just the proposal, it's who he proposed to. The screen changed to footage from the night before, fairy lights, the candle-lit table, Julian down on one knee, and Amelia, radiant, stunned and saying yes, and... The headline scrolled boldly underneath. From disowned to diamond ring, Julian Westwood proposes to Amelia Carter. Eleanor's cup slipped slightly in her grip, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. Across the room, Sloane stood frozen, mascara wand in one hand, her mouth slightly open. Wait. Wait, Amelia? She asked, as if the name itself was offensive. That's not our Amelia, but the next image left no doubt. There she was, her half-sister, wearing a sapphire-framed engagement ring that shimmered like a crown. The reporter continued. Sources confirm that Miss Carter met Mr. Westwood months ago and, despite his hidden identity, never treated him differently. Those close to Julian say he credits her with restoring his faith in love. Sloane dropped her mascara. No, she whispered. No. No, this is a PR stunt. It has to be... She's nothing. She's boring. She works at a bank. Eleanor said nothing. Not yet, because in her mind, memories were already playing in reverse. The way she'd dismissed Amelia at dinner tables, the lectures, the cold glares, the time she told her to be grateful for having a roof over her head. Sloane was pacing now, frantic. This was supposed to be me. I was the one who talked about marrying into the Westwood family. I've practiced signing their last name on paper. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. She's marrying the Westwood heir, and we threw her out. Sloane spun around. You were the one who told her to leave. You said she didn't belong. I didn't know, Eleanor said hollowly. She was nothing. She was kind, Eleanor corrected, her voice cracking. And we never saw it. The room fell silent again. Later that day, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, the TV off, her makeup removed, her thoughts uncomfortably loud. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then dialed a number she knew by heart. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Finally, she sent a text. Amelia, I saw the news. Please call me. We need to talk. No reply. And somehow, that hurt most of all. Because for the first time, Eleanor Carter realized she no longer had power over Amelia, not her time, not her attention, and certainly not her heart. Across the city, the Westwood estate was alive with warmth. Amelia stood beside Vivian in the sunroom, going over potential wedding venues. Charles was reviewing a charity proposal Julian had started, inspired by Amelia's work at the community clinic. Laughter filled the house. Belonging filled the air. Julian stepped into the room, kissed Amelia on the forehead, then handed her a phone. You have a missed call, he said, from your former home. Amelia looked at the screen. She paused, then pressed delete. I'm not ready, she whispered. Julian nodded. You don't owe them anything. But in her heart, Amelia knew one thing. One day, she would face them not to ask for apology, not for validation, but to show them that kindness never needed permission, that one day came sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, at a charity event hosted by the Westwoods, the media swarmed. Amelia arrived in a white satin dress, simple but graceful, her hair tucked behind one ear, diamond studs glittering gently. Julian stood proudly beside her, protective and calm. And in the back of the ballroom, uninvited but let in by one sympathetic staffer, stood Eleanor and Sloane. They looked out of place in the sea of elegance. Even Sloane, dressed in a flashy designer gown, couldn't match the effortless grace Amelia now carried. Julian spotted them first. His jaw clenched. Amelia touched his hand. It's okay, she said. Then she turned and walked toward them. The crowd parted like a storybook. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice shaking. Amelia, she said, you look beautiful. Amelia nodded politely. Thank you. There was a long silence. Then Eleanor spoke again. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say I was wrong. About you, about everything. Sloane looked at the floor, her voice barely audible. So was I. Amelia studied them both for a moment. Once upon a time, she would have begged for this, for an apology, for a kind word, for anything that felt like love. But now she didn't need it, because she had found a life built not on approval, but on truth. I forgive you, she said softly. But I've moved on. Eleanor's eyes welled with tears. You've become something extraordinary. No, Amelia replied gently. I've always been this. You just didn't look close enough. With that, she turned back toward Julian, and this time, she didn't look back. The Westwood estate had never looked more radiant. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Rows of ivory roses lined the aisle like a runway to heaven. Gold-trimmed chairs were filled with faces both familiar and famous business tycoons, philanthropists, ambassadors, and artists. But no one was watching them. Every eye was on her. Amelia Carter stood at the top of the grand staircase, her gown a waterfall of silk and lace. It hugged her gently, with embroidered vines climbing across the fabric like they'd grown just for her. Her hair was swept back with a tiara of white gold and moonstones, catching the light like a constellation. As the string quartet began playing 1,000 Years, the entire room stood. But Amelia didn't move right away. She closed her eyes for a moment, and she remembered. She remembered the cracked sidewalks, the cold dinners in silence, the feeling of never being enough. She remembered the way her stepmother called her nothing, the way her sister rolled her eyes, the way the world looked at a girl like her as invisible. And now, they looked at her like a vision. But it wasn't the gown or the diamonds. It was because she had survived, because she had chosen kindness over bitterness, love over revenge. She opened her eyes and walked. Julian stood at the altar in a tailored tuxedo, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes locked on her with something more powerful than lust or pride. It was reverence. When she reached him, he took her hand with a quiet reverence of his own. His touch still felt like that first time, gentle, honest, grounding. The minister smiled warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are gathered here today not just to witness the union of Julian Westwood and Amelia Carter, but to witness the triumph of something rare in this world, love that sees past circumstance, past expectation, past fear." There wasn't a dry eye in the front row. Charles and Vivian Westwood beamed like the sun. The staff at the estate, many of whom had watched Amelia blossom in just months, dabbed at their eyes discreetly. The vows were short, unscripted, because some truths didn't need pages. Julian went first. "I met you when I was at my lowest," he said, his voice thick. "Not financially, but emotionally. I had lost faith in people, in love, in the world. You didn't just restore that, you redefined it." Amelia squeezed his hand, tears pooling in her lashes. "You showed me," he continued, "that kindness isn't weakness, that love isn't a transaction, that the strongest people in the world are the ones who love anyway, even when no one loves them back." He paused. "And I promise, for every day of our life together, you will never feel unseen again." The room fell completely silent. Even the birds outside seemed to stop to listen. Then Amelia spoke. Her voice was soft, but it filled the hall like a hymn. "I used to think love was something you earned," she said, "that if you were good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, maybe someone would choose you." She looked out briefly, catching the eyes of Eleanor and Sloane in the back row, both dressed in muted tones, heads bowed. "I was wrong," Amelia said, turning back to Julian. "Love isn't earned, it's given, freely. Bravely, you gave me that, not because I was perfect, but because you saw my scars and didn't flinch." A pause. "I promise you this. I will never forget where we started. I will never stop fighting for the lost, the overlooked, the forgotten. Because we were them once, and now we have the power to be the ones who reach back." She reached up, gently cupped his face. "And I choose you. In storm or sunshine, with or without a last name, I choose you." There was no need for a cue. The minister smiled through his own tears. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Julian leaned in and kissed her. Soft, certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't end a story, but begins a legacy. The ballroom exploded with applause, cameras flashed, the music soared. Guests rose to their feet, cheering, crying, holding their loved ones a little tighter. But all Amelia could feel was the warmth of his hand in hers. And freedom. At the reception, laughter echoed through the hall. Julian led Amelia onto the dance floor for their first dance. He didn't care about steps or rhythm, he only cared about the smile on her face. When they twirled, she laughed, and that laugh was everything he ever wanted to protect. Then came the toasts. Vivian Westwood stood first. "I prayed my son would find a woman who loved him not for his fortune, but for his heart. And I thank God he did." Even Charles, normally stoic, dabbed at his eye. But the most unexpected moment came when someone stepped hesitantly to the mic. Eleanor Carter. She looked out of place in the luxury, but her voice was steady. I spent a long time thinking wealth was something you measured in assets, she said, her eyes on Amelia. But watching you today, I realized the richest person in this room is the one who never gave up on compassion. Sloane stood beside her, silent, tears rolling down her cheeks. They sat back down. No applause. But Amelia nodded to them grace, not approval. That night, when the guests had gone and the lights were low, Julian and Amelia stood on the balcony of their suite, overlooking the city. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "Was that real?" she whispered. He smiled, kissing the top of her head. Every second. And below them, the city kept buzzing. The world kept spinning, but in that moment, in that quiet place where her scars had met his promises, Amelia Carter became more than a bride. She became the woman who rewrote the story. The mansion was no longer just a place of chandeliers and silk-lined walls. It had become something else, a sanctuary. Where once Julian Westwood walked halls filled only with echoes, now laughter echoed through its corridors, high-pitched, nervous, hopeful laughter. Dozens of young girls now lived under this roof, survivors, dreamers, fighters. Some had fled forced marriages. Others had escaped abusive homes. A few had simply been forgotten. But none of them were invisible anymore. Amelia called them by name. 3 months after the wedding, Amelia and Julian launched the Westwood Initiative for Girls, a nonprofit dedicated to rescuing, housing, and empowering young women facing exploitation, abandonment, or silence. They didn't just write checks. They built dormitories, they trained teachers, they hired trauma counselors. They partnered with women who had lived it, survived it, and were ready to guide others to the other side. And Amelia? She didn't sit behind a desk. She walked the halls, ate lunch with the girls, sat beside them on garden benches when they were too scared to speak. She had been one of them, and they knew it. That's why they listened when she said, "You are not broken. You were betrayed, and now we build." One rainy Thursday, Amelia stood before a classroom of 12 girls, ages ranging from 11 to 16. Each carried stories too heavy for their shoulders, but they looked at her differently. Not like a savior, but like proof that survival was not the end of the story. She wrote 3 words on the whiteboard: voice, choice, power. Then she turned to them and asked quietly, "Do you know what all 3 of these have in common?" No one answered at first, until one girl, barely 12, whispered, "They were taken from us." Amelia smiled softly. "Yes, but now they're being returned." Meanwhile, Julian had taken a quieter route. He used his seat at the Westwood Board, his influence with legislators, and his old contacts in high places to push through new legal protections: age of consent laws, funding for shelters, tougher sentences for traffickers, incentives for corporations that supported survivor employment. He no longer cared about status, only legacy. And when asked by investors why his focus had shifted, he answered with one sentence: because the most valuable capital is a human soul that hasn't given up. They received letters from around the world. One from a girl in Kenya who had escaped child marriage because of a Westwood-funded intervention. Another from a shelter in Atlanta that used their blueprint to open 2 more homes. A senator's office even contacted them to collaborate on a federal campaign, Daughters Not Brides. But for Amelia, the most meaningful moment came one quiet afternoon when she found a letter slipped under her office door. It was written in pencil on lined paper. "Miss Amelia, I didn't know people like you existed. I thought kindness was a trick, that love was fake, but I saw how you looked at my sister when she cried last night. You didn't flinch. I've decided I want to be like you, not rich." Not famous, just a person who sees. Thank you for seeing me. L. Amelia read it 3 times before folding it gently and placing it inside the drawer next to her wedding photo. In the evenings, when the house quieted down, Amelia and Julian would sit on the rooftop balcony, mugs of tea in hand, watching the lights of the city flicker like fireflies. "Do you ever wonder," Julian asked one night, "how different our lives would have been if we hadn't met that day?" Amelia leaned her head against his shoulder. "I don't wonder, I know." He turned to her. "You saved me, Julian. Not just from the streets, from disappearing, from believing I didn't matter. You did that for me too," he said. "That's what love is, I think. Not rescuing, just reminding each other who we were before the world tried to erase us." She smiled, then whispered something she'd never said aloud before. "I don't want to be remembered as a billionaire's wife." Julian nodded slowly. "You won't be." "Then what?" Julian leaned in, kissed her hand and said, "You'll be remembered as the woman who turned pain into purpose and made power gentle again." Years later, when Amelia's face appeared on magazine covers, when Julian gave keynote speeches about restorative justice and compassion-led capitalism, people often asked the same question: how did this all start? And the answer was always the same. One act of kindness, one sandwich, one tired man on the sidewalk who didn't ask for anything but received everything. Life lesson from Amelia's journey, for the heart that's weathered time. As we grow older, it becomes easy to believe that kindness is outdated, that the world rewards ambition over compassion. But Amelia Carter's story reminds us of something timeless. Grace still matters. In a home where she was unseen and unloved, she chose not bitterness, but kindness. She gave her heart to a man with nothing, only to discover he was a man with everything. What does this teach us? That the value of a person lies not in what they own, but in how they see others. For those of us who've lived through love and loss, it's comforting to know this truth never changes. You are never too old, too late, or too small to change someone's life. Kindness isn't weakness, forgiveness isn't surrender, and love, a real love, doesn't come with conditions. So if you're wondering whether it's worth showing up for someone today, the answer is always yes. Because someone out there still needs your light,